Is it on now? Mom?
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Mom?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Mom, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. And I had to tell him what I did to save you from more sorrow. I am so sorry to the families of the girls that I killed. I want them to know I'm so sorry. And I pray every day for their daughter's soul. Mom, I love you with all my heart. And I'm so sorry that I turned out to be such a bad son. I just hope that you forgive me, Mom. I love you with all my heart. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm done.
My mother, unlike the other ladies, never went missing. She was seen the night before her murder. So even though the story is sad, that was something that I was happy about. Today has been the hardest thing I had to do in a long time. I'm doing it for you. For as long as I can remember, my mom worked at a chicken restaurant. Everybody in the community called my mom the chicken lady. And she would bring home chicken every day to the point where we didn't want to eat chicken anymore. But we had no choice. We ate the chicken. In our eyes, we had the perfect mom. We didn't know anything other than her being perfect. My mom's relationship with drugs, I can't pinpoint when it started, but I probably was like 12. We would get up in the morning and come downstairs after nights of her and her friends partying downstairs, and we would find little straws. We would play with them and collect them. But later on in life, we found out that they were using the straws to snort cocaine, basically. We didn't start realizing my mom had a drug habit until we started hearing it from other people. And like the kids be like, oh, that's why your mom on drugs. And we'll come to her defense, like, what are you talking about? Ain't nothing wrong with, our mom, your mom on drugs. But eventually, after a few years, we could tell the difference. But we always, in the back of your head, like, oh, she got time to, clean herself up. We seen her friends that used to get high with her when we were younger, like, we seen all of them turn their lives around. So, like, we were just patiently waiting on her turn. But her turn never came.
This is someone I was proud to walk up and down the street with, holding hands. Didn't care about what people would think about interracial relationship. It was just a loving relationship. No black, no white. It was just love. That's what it's all about. I love you, Laura, and I miss you. Well, the first time I laid eyes on Laura, I was at a basketball court. And Laura, she was just kind of outside the fence watching. And a friend of mine told me that she's interested in me. I looked over at her and I got bright-eyed like, yeah, she's pretty. So I went over and we just started having a great conversation. She laughed and I loved her laugh and that pretty smile she has. That was a great, warm feeling that I'll never forget. It was great. It went long after that. She told me she was pregnant. You know, we had more and more kids. There's 7 daughters and 1 son. She's a great mother. She was just a special person to me in my life. She was my woman. I was with her for 21 years. And some guy in the world had to ruin all that for me. That is not right, man. That is not.
This is the picture of the burn pit where Larry burned the bodies. I get this question all the time, every year. For 15 years, that exact same question. Why didn't anybody in the neighborhood notice that he was burning bodies? Well, when you burn meat, it smells like meat burning. I don't think that there was one single report or complaint about him burning. Not one. When this case started, I had been a detective for approximately 2 years, maybe 3. So I was a pretty fresh detective. The first girl was Sabrina Payne. She was found a year before in a cornfield. Sabrina, I believe, was partially clothed. And then Barbara Williams was victim number 2. A black female dumped on the side of the road. Their bodies were found within probably 25 or 30 mile radius. The scene was obvious that it was not the location of the crime, but it was what we referred to as a dump site. They were both from the same area, had the same lifestyle, prostitutes, black female prostitutes. Some of the investigators thought, well, that's just a drug overdose and somebody dumped the body. But I kept thinking to myself, just something ain't right here. Myself and one of the other detectives told our boss that we might have a serial killer. The boss said, don't talk like that. We don't want that. I'm sure that they were worried about overtime costs because during those times, our overtime was limited, the budgets were tight, and if it's a serial killer, it's really gonna be expensive, you know? So it was a budget issue, I'm sure. Yeah, it made me angry. I can remember distinctly saying that if these were white blondes, that we'd be busting our ass right now. I mean, I hate saying that, and I'm probably gonna catch a lot of if you put that on the show, but that's the truth. So, and I'm okay with that. I don't remember where I was. I just remember the boss calling saying, we got another one. Black female, naked. Okay, on my way. I do remember saying, you believe me now? We've got a serial killer. Every investigator, every detective has their own way of dealing with when they see a dead body. The way I dealt with seeing the dead bodies is very simple. I'm a Christian. I believe in God and go to church every Sunday. When I get to a death scene, I take a quick 10 seconds without anybody ever knowing it, and I say a prayer. Dear Lord, please let me figure out what happened. Take her soul, do what you need to do with it, but give me everything I need to find out what happened, and then I move on. Linda was working as a prostitute, and this date picked her up in an old beat-up truck and took her out on a gravel road where he assaulted her, had sex with her, refused to pay her, kicked her out, and she got dumped out on the side of the road. I got called the next day to do the investigation on what happened to Linda.
Just point it out.
I picked her up in my squad car. I drove her all over the South End asking her, you know, Linda, if you see the car, point it out to me. You know, and during that time, we started laughing and joking. Linda was hilarious. She was very, very funny. She was a very, very good person that made a couple bad choices, and she was an addict. The last time I talked to Linda, telling her, you need to stop this, you're gonna get hurt, you know, and I know, Dave, you know, I'm going to. When I get there, the crime scene person takes me to the scene. So I walk over, I'm like, yep, that's her. That's Linda. She's laying there unclothed. I remember seeing some maggots. She had a string or shoestring that was tied in a knot around her neck. I felt like I let her down. There was no DNA found on Barbara. There was no DNA found on Sabrina. And the first DNA that we were able to collect was from Linda Neal. We initially thought, okay, as soon as we get the match, we got our guy. But if DNA doesn't have a name, then DNA is useless. So you have to have the match. So
After seeing different murders broadcast on the news, it did kind of concern us because the profile of the women were kind of my mom's profile. Like they were all Black females that battle with drug addiction. I remember we seen it on the news. And I want to say everybody that was found, my mom knew on a personal level. So, you know, we would tell her, like, Mom, like, you need to be careful. You need to start staying home more. And she will always tell us, like, don't worry about me. You know, I'm good. She was like, oh, I'm not like them. In our heads, we're like, you are like them. But I guess she thought she was exempt from whatever was happening in our community. Eventually, her drug habit got too far out of control. I just began to see her spiral, like, down. First, it was basically her physical appearance, And then she would stay gone for days at a time. Like, it might be like 2 or 3 days. Like, have you heard from her? Have you heard from her? I do remember one time her coming to us saying that as she was ready to clean herself up, and she allowed us to take her to drug rehab. We took her, we dropped her off at the door. About an hour later, we got a call saying she checked herself out. So it was to the point where we knew we could only do so much. And when she left that facility, we kind of knew that this is gonna be a battle. From that day forward, it was a battle.
Well, when me and Laura, we first started doing drugs, crack cocaine, I believe I tried it before Laura did, and we both liked it, there's no doubt. And it was just pretty much a weekend thing. Within about 4-year span, I'd say it almost became a daily use of the drugs. So I constantly fought it. I mean, I don't think I ever let it totally win, in other words. But I was worried about Laura. It was pretty late, about, I don't know, 11:30, midnight, something like that, and some woman knocked on the door and asked for Laura. I said, well, what do you want? She goes, I want to talk to her. There was a car out there with the car running and the lights on. I didn't know who was in the car. Laura went to the door to talk to this woman, and about, I don't know, 5 minutes went by. And Laura says, I'm going to take off with them for a little bit. I'll be back. I said, it's late. Why don't you stay here? I said, we're having a good time. What are you going to go somewhere? Well, I got to go do something for them, and I'll be right back. When Laura walked out that door, that was probably the last night of her life. I think about half an hour went by, and maybe about 45 minutes went by. That was kind of where I started getting concerned. So I'd go out and I started looking for the woman that knocked on my door. I happened to know where she lived, so I went to her house and knocked on her door. I said, where's Laura at? Oh, she ain't here. I said, where'd she go? Where is she? Oh, she took off with him. And I said, well, who is he? It was Larry. I didn't even know the guy. I don't know what to tell you, and I think she shut the window. I probably looked till 2:30, 3 in the morning. I had this feeling. I couldn't get it out of me. So I couldn't give up on the search. I went home, got some sleep. Then I searched again the next day, going to different houses where I know she might be at. And nobody's seen her. Nobody. And I guess after a couple days, maybe 2 days tops, I went to her mother's house and I said, we gotta file missing persons or something. This is not like Laura. And it was the most awful feeling that you can have. It's like, did she run away? Did she just leave town?
The very last day, the very last day I saw my mom alive, she had come into the store where I work. And even though growing up, we knew my mom loved us, it was hardly ever said. You would feel it, but as far as hearing it, you never heard it. And this day, after she purchased her stuff and, we said our goodbyes, my mom was going out the door and she doubled back. And she was like, Mia, I love you. It shocked me, first of all, because she never said that. And of course, my natural reaction was, Mom, I love you too. So, and she walked out the door. And those were the last words we said to each other.
When the task force was formed, there were just a bunch of detectives, a few crime scene guys, a couple supervisors. And what would happen is every day we would be given tips to go investigate. And like me and my partner at the time, we would try to get the best tips because we wanted to be the one that caught the guy. We had, I think, 11 or 1,200 tips. And they just kept coming. I mean, it would be everything from, my mailman's really creepy. The next tip would be, I think you should look into this guy because I know he sees prostitutes all the time. Everybody on that task force worked 12 to 16-hour days. We're basically looking for a needle in a haystack. I remember specifically saying, how in the hell did that happen? We were down there. We were everywhere. I mean, how did this happen? How? We had several detectives in the area where the girls were being picked up. We were watching the prostitutes. If a prostitute got picked up, we were getting license plates, we were following them, we were watching them, we were doing everything with the manpower and everything that we had to stop it from happening again, and it literally happened right under our noses. So the feeling after getting that call was like a punch in the gut, because you're doing everything you possibly can and you think you're taking steps towards solving it, and all of a sudden, kapow, you take 2 steps back. Brenda was found on Taggart Road, Peoria County, out near Farmington, completely naked, except for I think she had one sock on, laying face down on a muddy gravel road. With Brenda, I do remember that the scene really gave us nothing. I mean, about all we got from the scene was some inconsistent tire tracks that we couldn't really pinpoint, and a victim, and that was it. I mean, so yeah, it's very frustrating. It's like, so what's this give us? Nothing? Nothing? It gives us nothing. Every time there's a body, the pressure builds. We needed him to make a mistake so that we could catch him. What are we missing? We're missing something. We're missing something. What is it? What is it? I mean, that's what detectives do. They get everything they can. They talk about it. They debate about it. They argue about it. They agree about it. But the bottom line is always, what are we missing? Because once you find what you're missing, you've got it. It's done.
Three days after last seeing my mom alive, I get a call from my uncle, and he's panicking on the phone, and he kept saying, "Mia, Brenda's dead, Brenda's dead." At the time, it didn't even register like what he had said. All I can remember is dropping the phone. I remember getting there and all these detectives and police there, and all I can remember asking them is, how do you know it's her? Like, you're telling me this, what information do you have that you know it's her? And they had told me they had already identified her by fingerprints. So they knew it was her. So once I got that confirmation, all I could think about is my sisters. Like, how would they start gonna survive without their mom? Like, who wants to break this news to anyone? At times, I wish I was the last one to get the news instead of the first one. One of the hardest things I ever had to do.
One of the other detectives looked into the tip from Vicky, and that was the very first time that I'd heard the name Bright. And I distinctly remember the detective saying, "We need to look into it." So me and my partner, we went to his house. The house Larry lived in, I think, was like a single stall garage that had been converted to an apartment, which was directly behind his mom's house. He had a koi pond and some beautiful flower gardens that he'd planted between his house and where his mom lived. It was well kept. Larry was easy to talk to. He wasn't very intelligent, but he seemed like a decent guy. I mean, he just seemed like a regular blue-collar Midwest person. He bragged to me about the koi pond he built for his mom. He bragged to me about the flower beds he did for his mom. I mean, everything revolved around his mom. I knew that we had DNA from one of the victims, so I asked Larry for a sample of his DNA for comparison purposes. Larry declined, but during the interview, we allowed Larry to smoke cigarettes, and it was a routine for me to take a cigarette butt if I needed it for DNA. After the interview was completed, Larry had eaten all the cigarette butts so that he wouldn't leave his DNA behind. As soon as I realized that he'd eaten the cigarette butts, I was like, okay, this is him. This has got to be him. Why else would you do that? I mean, I don't know anybody who eats cigarette butts, do you? I'm not sure how we got the DNA exactly. We might have gotten it from the plastic water bottle that was in the room when he ate the cigarette butts. He ate the cigarette butts and forgot about the water bottle. I'm not exactly sure how they got it. But we got the DNA back that came from Linda Neal, and it matched Larry. That immediately gave us enough to get a search warrant for his entire property. Right outside his door, between his house and the softball field, there was a burn pit. I remember one of the crime scene guys telling me that it stunk, that there was a smell. We found the bones in the burn pit in the backyard that turned out to be human bones. Those little bone pieces were about the size of a quarter. That was it. They were little bitty pieces of bone. And at that point, we arrest him. He had, by that time, obtained an attorney. So we had to come up with a plan to get Larry to start talking. without us asking him to start talking. And I was like, it's got to be his mom. As soon as he finds out that we're going to dig up his mom's flower beds that he planted, he's not going to like that. So, I mean, that's what direction we went. I said, Larry, we're going to dig up the flower beds. We're going to dig up the pond. We're going to dig up all the landscaping. And Larry's response was, you don't have to do that. I'll tell you. Tell what? What do you mean you'll tell me? I'll tell you everything. Okay, everybody stop. Let's go to an interview room.
What's up? I did it. How many of you did you do? Only 8. Hey, Larry. Hang in there, bud. Okay? Hang in there. How did they die? Did you strangle them? Or what happened? Yeah. All 8 of them were strangled? What did you use to strangle them? My hands. Your hands? Well, what about the one we found with the shoestring around it? I don't know, I've been watching court TV and I was trying to make it look different than... That was pretty smart. No one, here I am. I burned the bodies. How many missing girls are we talking about? 4? 4 girls? Okay. Debbie Lover.
We'd kill him inside of his house. And after he got done killing them, he would clean them with bleach. And then he would go out in his backyard and he would build a fire. He'd let it get really, really hot, and then he would lay the body on top of the wood, the hot coals. And as the fire was burning, Larry would take like a spade shovel and he'd chop the bodies up little by little as it was burning. And then after that, he would shovel the pieces into a bucket and then go dump them in various areas around town. There's Brenda, Laura, Linda, Sabrina, Barbara, Tamara, Shirley, and Shakanda. I asked him why, and he just said he don't know. Larry is one of the deepest levels of evil. I mean, there's no way to comprehend how evil you have to be to do what he did.
Okay, I'm recording.
Do it.
Hey, Matt, can you maybe point to the bone fragments that you got, the big one?
This appears to be one here.
Okay.
Appears we've got one there. There's
Maybe-
a fragment there.
Maybe out of that bucket, we're not sure.
Yeah, well, more up here. Oh, yeah.
The night of her murder, it rained. And because of the rain that night, he felt he couldn't burn her body because the rain would put the fire out. So he decided to load her dead, naked body in his car. He drove around and he threw her body on the side of a road. To me, being that some of the other victims were found like months later, some of them was chopped up and burned. I'm thankful that he did my mom how he did her. We was able to have an open casket funeral for her. Like, seeing her body, it doesn't do much, but it brings some kind of closure.
Hear what he did to her. There's no body. She was chopped up and burned. Chopped and burned. That was one of the most devastating ever in my life. I never felt rage more powerful than that I had thoughts of what I could do to him, or I had thoughts, why couldn't I have been there, busting into the door, wherever they were, and saved her? That's the hard part. I let her leave with a serial killer that I had no idea that was out there. But when I had that to tell the kids, that's when I think the reality hit me the hardest. It's just that, do you guys believe in angels? And I could tell my older ones, they could tell what I was going to say. I could see it in their face. I could see them starting to break down before I told them. I just remember them all going, yeah, Dad, we believe in angels. And that's when it cast, well, now your mother's an angel. Your mother's got wings now. She's an angel. But I remember how hard that was when I could see their faces and I could tell they could tell what I was about to tell them. That is not right, man. That is not right. It just ain't right. And it's all because of a bad guy. A bad guy got rid of my soulmate.
Do you remember a man named Detective Dave Hoyle?
I could never forget that man's name. I do remember. He was one that told us if we ever needed anything, if we ever wanted to know anything, that he would be honest to us and give us the most information he could. And when I say he is a man of his word, he is a man of his word. And I don't think he know how much he means to me and my sisters.
Brenda's daughters very clearly remember that you cared.
Yeah, it is nice to be able to help those people. And it's hard when you try to help and you just don't get it done in time. I mean, you can't act like you care. People will see through that in a second. And, it's like, you have to care.
I'm content that I don't have to worry about my mom. We know where she is. Like, it's not a worry. Like, is she gonna come home? Is something gonna happen to her? I just hate the way that it happened, the way she will be remembered to most that didn't know her. She's categorized as a drug user and a prostitute. Just because the other women had a pattern of prostituting, you can't label all these women the same. They all have different lives, different reasons for doing what they did. And I feel like that hurts more. Like, if you didn't know her and you Googled her name, all you're gonna see is Larry Bright. Like, she didn't live for him. She didn't die because she had cocaine in her system. She died because a monster got his hands on her and took her life. Not because she did drugs. As long as I can, I will always try to speak the good about my mom. Before him, she was a good person and she touched a lot of people. And even after him, she will still touch a lot of people.
Michigan 2001 cold case solved. Shocking confession ends mystery. There are some crimes that die the moment the police tape comes down. And then there are the others. The ones that linger. The ones that sit in the back of a town's mind like a shadow that never quite leaves. The ones people stop talking about in public but still whisper about 20 years later when the streets are empty and the porch lights are the only things awake. In the fall of 2001, in a quiet Michigan community surrounded by endless stretches of farmland, thick woods, and roads that disappeared into darkness after sunset, a young woman vanished without a trace. No scream, no witness, no body, just a normal day that ended with a question nobody could answer. At first it looked temporary, the kind of disappearance that happens every year. Someone leaves, someone needs space, someone misses a phone call, someone turns up a few days later embarrassed and exhausted. That was what people told themselves. That was what her family desperately wanted to believe. But by the third day, panic began replacing hope. By the seventh day, volunteers were searching fields. By the second week, helicopters were in the sky. And by the end of the month, an entire community had begun asking the same terrifying question. What happened? The answer would remain hidden for more than 2 decades. And when it finally arrived, it would come from the last place anyone expected. The story begins on a cold October afternoon. The air carried that familiar Michigan chill that announces winter long before the snow arrives. Leaves covered the roads. The sky was gray. Stores closed early. People hurried home before darkness settled across the countryside. 23-year-old Emily Harper finished her shift at a local grocery store shortly after 5 o'clock. Co-workers remembered nothing unusual. She smiled. She joked. She talked briefly about visiting her mother over the weekend. She clocked out. She walked into the parking lot. And then she disappeared. At 5:18 p.m., one employee remembered seeing her blue sedan leaving the lot. At 5:22 p.m., another customer believed she saw the same vehicle heading east. After that, the trail simply stopped. No confirmed sightings. No phone calls. No credit card activity. Nothing. The silence was immediate and complete. When Emily failed to arrive home, her family became concerned. When she failed to answer calls, concern became fear. When morning arrived with no sign of her, fear became alarm. The police response was swift. Officers interviewed friends. Co-workers were questioned. Family members were examined closely. Boyfriends, former boyfriends, neighbors, everyone. Investigators searched Emily's apartment first. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Nothing appeared disturbed. Her purse was missing. Her car was missing. Her keys were missing. At first glance, it looked as if she had simply gone somewhere. But nobody could explain where. Days later, search teams discovered her vehicle. It sat abandoned near a gravel access road roughly 12 miles from town. The location immediately raised questions. It wasn't on the route she normally drove. It wasn't near a friend's house. It wasn't near a workplace. It wasn't near anything. Just woods. Dense woods. The kind that seem endless when you're standing at their edge. The car doors were locked. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. The vehicle itself offered almost no clues. No blood. No signs of violence. No obvious evidence. Yet investigators couldn't shake a feeling. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Search teams flooded the area. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through fields and forests. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned from above. Divers searched nearby water. Nothing. Not a single trace. Emily Harper had vanished as completely as if the earth had opened beneath her feet. News coverage exploded. Local headlines quickly turned into regional attention. Reporters arrived. Television crews parked along quiet streets. The case became the topic of conversation in diners, churches, schools, and grocery stores. Every person seemed to have a theory. Some believed she had been abducted. Others suspected someone she knew. A few wondered if she had staged her own disappearance. Investigators examined every possibility. Each one collapsed. No ransom demand ever came. No financial activity followed her disappearance. No evidence suggested she had planned to leave. Her future plans remained intact. Appointments were scheduled. Bills remained unpaid. Personal belongings were left behind. Nothing fit. Months passed. The investigation widened. Thousands of tips poured in. Most went nowhere. Some created brief moments of excitement. A reported sighting in Ohio. Possible witness in Indiana. An anonymous phone call. Each lead generated hope. Each lead eventually died. The case slowly entered a dangerous phase. Time. Time destroys investigations. Memories fade. Witnesses move away. Evidence deteriorates. Details become uncertain. What once seemed important begins to blur. Detectives understood this. They fought against it relentlessly. Boxes filled with reports accumulated. Photographs multiplied. Maps covered office walls. Names were highlighted, crossed out, highlighted again. Yet every road seemed to end in darkness. Then came the rumors. Small towns create stories when answers don't exist. People whispered about suspicious men, suspicious vehicles, strange encounters, arguments nobody could verify, confessions nobody could prove. One name surfaced repeatedly. A local mechanic named Daniel Mercer. Daniel wasn't a suspect initially. In fact, he barely appeared in the early investigation. But rumors surrounded him. Several residents claimed he behaved strangely after Emily vanished. One witness reported seeing him near the abandoned vehicle location days before police discovered the car. Another claimed Daniel suddenly sold a truck he had owned for years. Investigators examined him, questioned him, searched for connections. They found none. No physical evidence. No direct link. No witness placing him with Emily. Nothing. Daniel denied everything. The investigation moved on. Years passed. The file grew colder. The headlines disappeared. Search efforts ended. Volunteers returned to their lives. New crimes replaced old ones. Children grew up. Businesses closed. Families moved away. But Emily's family never stopped searching. Birthdays came and went. Christmases passed. Photographs aged. Hope transformed into something quieter. Something heavier. The kind of hope carried by people who understand that answers may never arrive. Every anniversary reopened old wounds. Every news article brought temporary attention. Every tip rekindled possibility. And every dead end deepened the heartbreak. Meanwhile, the cold case remained active. Barely. Detectives changed. Administrations changed. Priorities changed. The file survived because a few investigators refused to let it disappear completely. One of them was Detective Laura Bennett. She inherited the case nearly 18 years after Emily vanished. Most people viewed the investigation as impossible. Laura viewed it differently. She believed cold cases often fail because investigators become trapped inside the assumptions of the original inquiry. She started from the beginning. Every witness statement, every report, every photograph, every note, thousands upon thousands of pages. She searched for inconsistencies, patterns, contradictions, anything. Weeks became months. Months became years. Then one detail caught her attention. A witness statement buried deep within the file. It was old, almost forgotten. The witness had reported seeing a pickup truck parked near the gravel road on the evening Emily disappeared. The statement had received little attention because the description was vague. But Laura noticed something. The truck description closely matched a vehicle once owned by Daniel Mercer. The same Daniel Mercer whose name had surfaced repeatedly over the years. The same Daniel Mercer who had never completely escaped suspicion. Laura dug deeper. Old records revealed something unexpected. Daniel had lied during one of his original interviews. Not about Emily, about his whereabouts. A small lie, the kind investigators often dismiss. Yet small lies sometimes hide larger truths. Laura continued pulling at the thread. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the entire case began to move. Not because of new forensic evidence. Not because of a dramatic discovery in the woods. Not because a body had finally been found. The movement came from people. Because after 20 years, people change. Friendships end. Loyalties weaken. Secrets become burdens. And somewhere inside Michigan, someone had been carrying a burden for far too long. The burden did not arrive in the form of a dramatic phone call or a stranger walking into a police station demanding to speak with detectives. It emerged quietly, almost invisibly, buried beneath years of silence and fear. The kind of silence that settles over a person so completely it becomes part of their identity. It began with a woman named Karen Mitchell. In 2001, Karen had been 22 years old. She lived on the outskirts of town, worked part-time at a gas station, and occasionally spent weekends with a circle of friends that included Daniel Mercer. Back then, nobody paid much attention to her statements. She had been interviewed, questioned, released, just another witness among hundreds. But 2 decades later, Detective Laura Bennett noticed something unusual. Karen's original interview lasted less than 12 minutes. 12 minutes. For someone who reportedly spent time with Daniel during the week of Emily Harper's disappearance. The transcript was brief, almost suspiciously brief. Laura requested a follow-up. At first Karen refused. Then she ignored calls. Then she canceled a scheduled meeting. The behavior immediately raised concerns. Experienced investigators know that avoidance can mean many things: fear, trauma, distrust, or knowledge. Eventually Karen agreed to speak. The interview room was quiet. No pressure. No accusations. Just questions. Simple questions. Questions about a town frozen in memory. Questions about people she had not seen in years. Questions about Daniel Mercer. Karen appeared nervous from the moment she entered. Her hands trembled. She struggled to maintain eye contact. She repeatedly asked if the conversation was confidential. Laura listened carefully. Every word mattered. Every pause mattered. Every glance toward the door mattered. Then Karen said something that changed everything. Not a confession. Not evidence. Just a sentence. A single sentence. "I always thought something was wrong about that night." The room fell silent. Laura let the words hang in the air. Karen looked down. For several seconds she said nothing. Then the story slowly began to emerge. She described a gathering at Daniel's property a few days after Emily vanished. Several friends had been there. Nothing unusual at first. Music, beer, conversations. Yet Daniel had seemed different. Distracted, agitated, watching everyone, watching the windows, watching the road. According to Karen, someone eventually mentioned Emily's disappearance. The reaction was immediate. Daniel became angry, not emotional, not concerned, angry. He shut down the conversation, changed the subject, refused to discuss it. At the time, Karen thought little of it. People react strangely to tragedy. But years later, the memory remained. Because it wasn't just what Daniel said. It was how he said it. The fear, the tension, the look in his eyes. Laura pressed further. Karen hesitated. Then she revealed another detail. One she had never told investigators. That same night, she had wandered into Daniel's garage looking for a drink. Inside, she noticed something strange. A tarp, large, freshly folded, covered in dark stains. Daniel appeared moments later. According to Karen, his reaction was explosive. He ordered her out. Immediately, she remembered feeling startled, embarrassed, confused. Again, she never reported it. Years passed. Life moved on. But now those memories had resurfaced. Laura left the interview with more questions than answers. Yet for the first time in years, the case felt alive. Investigators reopened every record connected to Daniel Mercer. Financial documents, property records, employment history, vehicle ownership, old relationships, old complaints, old rumors. What emerged was unsettling. Over the years, Daniel had repeatedly attracted suspicion without ever attracting charges. Former girlfriends described controlling behavior. Former co-workers described sudden outbursts. Neighbors described arguments late at night. None of it proved murder. None of it proved abduction. But collectively it painted a picture. A darker picture than investigators had previously understood. Then another witness surfaced. A man named Robert Hale. In 2001, Robert worked for a road maintenance contractor. His memory centered on a specific evening. The evening Emily disappeared. At approximately 6:30, he remembered seeing a pickup truck parked near the gravel road where Emily's vehicle was eventually discovered. Not unusual by itself. Except for one detail. The truck appeared positioned deliberately, almost as if it were blocking access. Robert had never identified the driver. The distance was too great. But when shown photographs of Daniel's old truck, he immediately reacted. Not certainty, not confirmation, recognition, enough to concern investigators. The case began gathering momentum. Reporters noticed activity. Requests for records increased. Questions resurfaced. The old mystery was breathing again. And Daniel Mercer knew it. Detectives learned he had recently contacted several people connected to the original investigation. Friends, former co-workers, even distant acquaintances. The conversations appeared harmless on the surface. But the timing felt impossible to ignore. Why now? Why after 20 years? Why reach out to people tied to a cold case that had remained dormant for decades? Investigators watched carefully. Still, they lacked the one thing they desperately needed: evidence. Without evidence, suspicion remains suspicion. No matter how strong, no matter how convincing, no matter how many people believe they know the truth. Laura understood that. She also understood something else. Cold cases rarely break because of one dramatic revelation. They break because tiny fragments finally connect. One witness, one memory, one contradiction, one mistake. Eventually someone slips. Eventually someone talks. Eventually someone carries the weight too long. The breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. Not through law enforcement. Not through forensic science. Through a hospital. A social worker contacted investigators regarding a terminally ill patient. The patient had made disturbing statements. Statements involving violence. Statements involving regret. Statements involving a woman who disappeared years earlier. Detectives moved quickly. The man's name was Thomas Briggs. His connection to Daniel Mercer dated back decades. Former friend. Former hunting partner. Former drinking companion. The relationship had ended years before. Nobody knew exactly why. When investigators arrived, Thomas appeared exhausted. Illness had reduced him to a shadow of himself. But his mind remained sharp, and guilt seemed to hang over him like a storm cloud. The interview lasted nearly 4 hours. At first Thomas spoke indirectly. Fragments, hints, half-finished memories. Then gradually the walls began to crack. He described Daniel as a man haunted by something. A man who drank heavily after 2001. A man prone to emotional breakdowns when certain subjects emerged. Most importantly, Thomas claimed Daniel once confessed. Not officially, not formally, not while sober, but during a late-night conversation years earlier. The words had stayed with him ever since. Daniel allegedly told him he had done something terrible, something he could never take back, something involving a girl, a road, and a mistake. Investigators listened carefully. The statement was explosive, yet still frustratingly vague. Thomas could not provide dates, could not provide recordings, could not provide evidence. Only memories, memories decades old. Still, the implications were enormous, because now multiple witnesses pointed toward the same man. The pressure intensified. Detectives sought another interview with Daniel Mercer. He declined. Lawyers became involved. Communication narrowed. The atmosphere changed immediately. What had once been a cold case was beginning to resemble an active criminal investigation. Reporters descended on the town again. Camera crews returned. Residents watched history repeating itself. The same streets, the same photographs, the same unanswered questions. Except this time there was a suspect, an unofficial suspect, a suspect who had lived among them for years. People began looking backward, re-examining old encounters, old memories, old conversations. Every strange interaction suddenly felt significant. Every rumor gained new life. And as public attention intensified, something remarkable happened. Daniel started talking, not to police, to people around him. Friends reported unusual conversations. Family members noticed dramatic mood swings. Former acquaintances described emotional phone calls. Several people later recalled hearing variations of the same statement. "I'm tired." Simple words, but words that carried weight. The kind of words investigators hear before confessions. The kind of words spoken by people exhausted from hiding secrets. Meanwhile, Laura Bennett pursued another path. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, advanced search techniques, modern forensic reviews. Technology had changed dramatically since 2001. Places once impossible to examine could now be explored in new ways. One location immediately stood out. A parcel of rural land previously owned by Daniel's family. The property had been searched years earlier. Briefly, incompletely. Now investigators returned. The landscape looked ordinary. Grass, trees, silence. Yet beneath that silence, something waited. Excavation teams arrived. Equipment rolled across the field. News helicopters circled overhead. Residents gathered at a distance. Watching, waiting, speculating. Hour after hour passed. Then workers uncovered something. Not human remains. Not immediately, but evidence. Old evidence. Buried evidence. Fragments connected to a vehicle. Fragments dating roughly to the early 2000s. Investigators refused to discuss details publicly. The secrecy fueled speculation. Rumors exploded across the community. Social media amplified every theory, every photograph, every whisper. And through it all, Daniel Mercer remained silent. Until one rainy evening in November. 23 years after Emily Harper vanished. 23 years after a blue sedan disappeared into darkness. 23 years after a community lost its sense of safety. A call came into the sheriff's office. The caller identified himself immediately. His voice was calm, weak, almost defeated. The dispatcher recognized the name instantly. Daniel Mercer. He said only a few words. Words that would send shockwaves through the investigation. Words investigators had waited decades to hear. "I need to tell someone what happened." And for the first time since 2001, the mystery that had haunted Michigan for an entire generation began moving toward an answer nobody was prepared to hear. The phone call did not feel like resolution. It felt like impact. like something heavy finally hitting the floor after years of being suspended in air, unseen but always present. The sheriff's dispatcher froze for a moment, unsure if she had heard correctly, unsure if the voice on the line belonged to the same man whose name had lived inside file cabinets for more than 2 decades. Daniel Mercer, the man investigators had circled without proof, the man witnesses had whispered about without certainty, the man who had drifted through every theory like a stain that never fully washed out. And now he was asking to speak, not denying, not threatening, not disappearing, asking. Within 30 minutes, patrol units were moving. Within an hour, Detective Laura Bennett was already reviewing every note, every witness statement, every inconsistency that had been collected over years like broken glass no one had yet assembled into a single shape. The call had been brief. No details, no confession, just a sentence repeated twice, as if repetition might steady him. "I need to tell someone what happened." The phrase echoed differently in every mind that heard it. To some officers it sounded like surrender. To others it sounded like manipulation. To Laura, it sounded like pressure finally reaching its limit. Daniel agreed to meet at the county sheriff's office. No house visit. No public location. No lawyers present at first. Just him. And them. The building was already tense before he arrived. Word spreads quickly in places like this. Even without official statements, even without confirmation, people know when something is changing. Rain fell hard that night. Thick sheets against the windows. The kind of rain that makes headlights blur and streetlights smear into long halos of orange and white. The parking lot outside the sheriff's office filled with reflections, distorted versions of the world bending across wet asphalt. At 9:14 p.m., a single pickup truck turned into the lot. Old, worn, familiar in a way that made several officers instinctively straighten without knowing why. Daniel Mercer stepped out slowly. He looked older than his file photographs, but not dramatically so. Time had not reshaped him as much as it had hollowed him. There was a weight in his posture, a kind of controlled exhaustion that suggested he had been carrying something for far too long without ever setting it down. No dramatic entrance. No resistance. No handcuffs. Just movement toward the door. Inside, the air was colder. Artificial light replaced rain. Cameras were positioned discreetly, not for spectacle, but for record. Everything about the room was designed to preserve truth, even when truth refused to appear. Laura sat across from him. No immediate questions. No accusations. Just silence. The kind of silence that forces a person to decide whether they will continue carrying what they have brought with them. Daniel broke it first. "I didn't plan for it to happen like that," he said. His voice was steady, but not strong. Controlled, but not confident. Laura did not interrupt. He stared at the table instead of her. "It wasn't something I woke up intending to do. People always think it starts that way. Like a decision. Like a line you cross and never look back. But it doesn't feel like that when you're inside it." The words hung in the air like fragments of something larger that refused to fully form. Laura finally spoke. "What happened to Emily Harper?" The question was simple. It landed like a hammer. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted. Not clarity. Not peace. Something closer to collapse. "I saw her car that day," he said quietly. "In the lot. I didn't know her. Not really. I just noticed her sometimes. You notice people in small towns without meaning to. You remember faces more than names." His fingers tightened against the edge of the table. "I followed her." The room did not react outwardly, but something inside it changed. The air felt denser. The recordings suddenly more important. The silence no longer neutral. Laura's voice remained level. "Why?" Daniel shook his head slowly, like the answer was not something he could translate into language that would survive being spoken. "I don't know," he said. "Not the way you mean it. Not something clean. Not something logical. It just happened. I told myself I was going to talk to her. That's what I kept repeating. Just talk." He paused. "And then I made a mistake." The word mistake landed differently than expected. Too small, too insufficient, too ordinary for something that had erased a human being from the world. Laura leaned forward slightly. What kind of mistake? Daniel's jaw tightened. Silence stretched again. Outside, rain intensified. It sounded like static against the building. When she realized I was following her, he said finally. She tried to leave. She panicked. I panicked too. Everything became fast. Too fast. I didn't think. I reacted. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Laura did not move. She waited. Because investigators learn this, interruptions can close doors that will never open again. Daniel continued. It wasn't supposed to go that far. That sentence. That single sentence. It changed the room in a way no report ever could. Not because it explained everything, but because it confirmed what had never been confirmed. A direction, proximity, a collision point between two lives that had been separated for 23 years of unanswered questions. Laura kept her voice steady. After that, Daniel exhaled slowly, long, heavy, like he was pushing something out of him that had never belonged inside. I drove, he said. I drove for a long time. I didn't know where. I just knew I couldn't go back. I stopped at the property. My family's land. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just had time. He stopped again. His hands were shaking now. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. The confession was not clean. It was not structured. It did not behave like television versions of truth. It was fractured, incomplete, shaped by memory and avoidance and decades of internal distortion. But it was moving, piece by piece, towards something irreversible. Laura asked the next question carefully. Where is she, Daniel? That question did not produce immediate words. Instead, it produced a long silence that felt different from all the others. This one was not defensive, not evasive. It was heavy with something else entirely. Grief, or what remained of it after time had done its work. I don't know, he said. And for the first time, something in his expression suggested that this answer might be the most honest thing he had said all night. I didn't bury her, he added quickly. I didn't do that. I didn't plan anything like that. Panicked. I left. I kept leaving things unfinished. The room tightened again. Because unfinished does not mean harmless. Unfinished means unresolved. And unresolved means still somewhere in the world. Still waiting to be found. Laura exchanged a brief glance with the detective beside her. The investigation was no longer hypothetical. It was now procedural. Containment. Verification. Recovery. Truth still had to be located inside the chaos of memory. Outside the room, the building shifted into motion. Search warrants were prepared. Teams were notified. Locations that had once been speculation were now priorities. Daniel remained seated, as if sitting still was the only thing preventing him from collapsing entirely. And then, quietly, almost as an afterthought, he added something that froze the entire sequence of decisions being made around him. I went back, he said. Once. Months later. I told myself I had to know. But I couldn't find anything. I couldn't face it. I left again. That single detail expanded the case outward again. Because return changes everything. Return means memory. Return means possibility. Return means the story did not end where everyone assumed it ended. Laura closed the folder in front of her slowly. Not because the case was finished, but because it had just become something larger than interrogation. It had become geography. And somewhere in rural Michigan, beneath years of weather, silence, and forgetting, answers were still waiting to be uncovered. The cold case was no longer cold. It was moving. And for the first time in 23 years, the darkness around Emily Harper's disappearance was beginning to shift toward light, even if that light would reveal something no one was ready to see. The moment Daniel Mercer left the interrogation room, nothing about the building felt the same anymore. Not the hallways, not the doors, not even the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they had for decades without change. Something fundamental had shifted, not in architecture, but in perception. Every officer who passed the room now carried the same unspoken awareness. The story they had been chasing for 23 years had finally started speaking back. But speaking was not the same as revealing. And what Daniel had given them was not truth in its final form. It was fragments. Fragments that pointed toward land, toward motion, toward a night that refused to exist in a single stable version. Detective Laura Bennett stood alone in the evidence room, replaying every sentence in her mind. Not the emotional weight of it, not the human collapse behind it, but the structure, the timing, the inconsistencies, the gaps between what was said and what was not. I followed her. That line anchored everything. But anchors only matter if you know what they are attached to. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed but unsettled. The county felt different in the aftermath of the confession, as if the air itself had absorbed something irreversible. By morning, search operations were already being assembled. The first location was obvious. Daniel Mercer's family property, the land he had mentioned twice, the place where he claimed confusion, panic, and return all converged into a memory that still refused to stabilize after 2 decades. The property sat outside town limits, surrounded by uneven forest and stretches of land that had never been fully cultivated. Old fencing cut across sections that no longer served a clear purpose. Weathered structures leaned slightly with time, like they were tired of standing. When investigators arrived, they did not speak much. There was no need. Everyone understood the weight of what they were about to do. This was no longer a search for a missing person in the abstract sense. It was a search for consequence. Ground units moved in first, then cadaver dogs, then survey teams carrying updated mapping equipment that did not exist in 2001. Technology had changed. The land had not. And that was the problem. Because land remembers differently than people do. It does not forget. It only covers. Hours passed. Nothing. The kind of nothing that builds tension instead of relieving it. The kind of nothing that forces investigators to question whether they are chasing truth or chasing expectation. Laura walked the perimeter slowly, observing not for movement but for disruption. Subtle differences in soil, unnatural dips, irregular growth patterns, anything that suggested interference. A forensic technician called her over near the eastern edge of the property. There was a section of ground that did not match the surrounding terrain. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough to notice, enough to matter. The soil density was different, the vegetation thinner, the ground slightly uneven in a way that did not follow natural erosion patterns. Equipment was brought in, measurements taken, flags placed, and for the first time since the investigation began, silence in the field became something different. Not empty, suspended. The excavation began carefully, layer by layer, surface first, then deeper. The process was slow enough to preserve context, but urgent enough to acknowledge possibility. Reporters had already gathered beyond the perimeter. News vans lined the distant road like quiet witnesses. Cameras pointed not at people but at land, at the idea that something buried might finally decide to surface. By late afternoon, the first object was recovered. A fragment of metal, old, corroded, not identifiable immediately, but clearly not natural to the soil. Then another. Then a piece of synthetic material degraded by time. The forensic team paused, not because they had found proof, but because they had found direction. Laura did not announce anything publicly. She knew better than to allow interpretation to outrun evidence. Cold cases had a way of collapsing under premature certainty. Instead, she requested deeper excavation, and waited. As daylight faded, the field transformed under artificial lighting. Shadows stretched across uneven ground. Every movement became sharper, more defined, more consequential. Then one of the dogs reacted. A shift in behavior, subtle at first, then persistent. Handlers immediately adjusted position. The signal was not dramatic, but it was consistent, and consistency in this field often mattered more than intensity. Markers were repositioned. Ground was reevaluated. A new section was identified slightly north of the original excavation point. The soil there was denser, heavier, less cooperative, as if it had been disturbed long ago and settled into resistance. Laura watched without speaking as equipment adjusted. Every second now felt like it belonged to a different version of time, one where the past was not past, only hidden beneath incremental layers of forgetfulness. A technician called out again. Another object, then another, but still no human remains. The absence of what everyone was expecting created a strange psychological tension. Relief and disappointment could not coexist cleanly. Instead, they merged into uncertainty, because absence does not equal innocence, and presence does not always arrive in the form people imagine. As night deepened, operations paused briefly, but because the investigation had reached a threshold, a decision point, continue blindly, or reevaluate based on what had been uncovered. Laura gathered the team near the edge of the field. Her voice was calm, controlled. "We are not confirming conclusions tonight," she said. "We are documenting anomalies. Every fragment, every layer, every inconsistency. This is no longer about proving a theory. It is about reconstructing sequence." No one argued. No one needed to, because everyone understood what had changed. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a reconstruction effort, a timeline buried under time itself. Meanwhile, inside the sheriff's office, Daniel Mercer had been placed in a holding interview room again, not formally detained in the traditional sense, but no longer free to move without observation. He had not spoken since leaving earlier. He sat quietly, hands folded, staring at a point on the table that did not change. When Laura entered later that night, she did not sit immediately. She placed a photograph on the table instead. Emily Harper, from the year before she disappeared. Smiling, unaware of the absence that would define her name for decades. Daniel looked at it without touching it. His expression tightened, but not in resistance. In recognition. "She didn't deserve it," he said quietly. Laura studied him, not for emotion, for alignment between statement and memory. "What happened after you left the property?" she asked. Daniel's voice lowered. "I drove," he said again. "I kept driving. I didn't sleep. I didn't think clearly. I just moved, like movement could undo it." Laura remained silent. He continued. "And then I came back later. Days. I don't remember exactly. I told myself I needed to fix what I did, but I couldn't even approach the place properly. I stopped before I got there. I turned around. The pattern was becoming clearer. Not of planning, but of avoidance. Not of strategy, but of collapse." Laura leaned slightly forward. "Daniel," she said carefully, "when you say you didn't bury her, what exactly are you telling us happened?" He did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was quieter than before. "I'm telling you I don't remember everything the way you want me to remember it." That answer was not satisfying, but it was revealing in its own way, because memory under pressure does not behave like testimony. It behaves like erosion. It loses edges first, then structure, then certainty, and what remains is often incomplete. Outside, the field remained under observation. Floodlights kept the land visible through the night, but visibility does not equal understanding. And in the distance, beyond the perimeter, Michigan remained what it had always been: quiet, cold, and full of places where things could disappear without ever fully leaving. The investigation had crossed its first real threshold. But the most important question had not yet been answered. Not what happened, not who, but where the truth had been resting all this time, and whether the land would finally give it back. The night over the property did not behave like a normal night. Settled, pressed down. It turned every sound into something sharper than it should have been. Even the wind felt measured, as if it were moving carefully around something it did not want to disturb. By midnight, The excavation site had expanded beyond its original boundaries. What began as a focused search had become a widening grid of possibility, each square of earth treated like a potential truth waiting to be uncovered. Floodlights carved the darkness into hard geometric sections. Shadows no longer blended, they fractured. Inside that fractured light, every movement mattered. Every pause mattered more. Laura Bennett stood at the edge of the field, coat pulled tight against the cold that had returned with a suddenness that felt almost intentional. She watched the technicians work in silence, their motions repetitive, methodical, almost ritualistic. Dig, sift, document, move, repeat. But beneath the rhythm, there was hesitation. Not doubt, not disbelief, something more dangerous. Expectation beginning to form without permission. A second call came in from the holding room. Daniel Mercer had requested to speak again. Laura did not respond immediately. Instead, she kept watching the field, as if distance might provide clarity. But clarity did not arrive in landscapes like this. It arrived in fragments, and fragments rarely agreed with each other. When she returned inside, Daniel was exactly as she had left him. Still, folded inward, eyes fixed on nothing. But something about him had changed slightly. Not physically, not visibly. It was in the way he acknowledged her presence without looking up, as if the act of speaking now required less resistance than before. Laura sat. No photograph this time. Just the weight of silence between them. Daniel spoke first. "I keep thinking about the sound," he said. Laura did not interrupt. "The sound of the road," he continued. "When everything else stops, you notice it. Tires on gravel. Engine fading. I didn't notice it at the time. Not the way I should have." His voice carried something unstable beneath it. Not panic. Not confession in the dramatic sense. Something closer to disassembly. Laura asked quietly, "What do you remember clearly?" Daniel exhaled through his nose, slow. "Pieces," he said. "Not the order. Never the order." Outside, somewhere in the field, a generator shifted tone. The sound seeped through the walls faintly, a mechanical reminder that the search was still ongoing. Daniel continued, "I remember pulling over. I remember getting out. I remember thinking I should just talk to her. That's the part that keeps repeating. Like a loop. Like if I say it enough times it becomes true instead of what actually happened." Laura watched him carefully. "Did you approach her car first?" A pause. "Yes," he said. Another pause. And then, Daniel's fingers tightened against each other. "I don't know how long I stood there," he said. "That's the part that doesn't stay stable. She saw me, or maybe she didn't at first. I can't tell anymore what's real and what comes after." Laura let the silence stretch, because this was where investigations either broke or deepened, between certainty and collapse, between memory and reconstruction. "You followed her from the parking lot," Laura said slowly. "Yes. And you made contact on the road." "I think so," he replied, voice lower now. "And something happened during that contact that escalated the situation." Daniel nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Yes. The word did not resolve anything, but it aligned multiple fragments into a direction. Outside, a call came from the field. A technician requested Laura immediately. No urgency in tone, but something underneath it that did not need explanation. When she returned to the property, the excavation had shifted again. Not outward, downward, deeper than before. And what had been found was no longer abstract. It was structured, a shape, not fully defined, but no longer random. The ground had yielded something that resisted interpretation at first. Layers of soil gave way to something denser, something that did not behave like earth, something that forced the team to slow their movements to near stillness. Laura approached without speaking. A technician pointed. No words were needed. The outline was partial, incomplete, but unmistakably artificial in origin. Not a natural formation, not debris scattered randomly over time. Something had been placed and covered years ago. carefully enough that time had nearly erased it. But not completely. The discovery did not produce celebration. It produced silence. The kind that replaces speculation with focus. Every person on the field understood immediately that the investigation had crossed a threshold it could not return from. Laura stepped closer. The wind had picked up again, moving across the open land with a sound that now felt almost intrusive. She did not allow assumptions. Only procedure. Secure perimeter, she said. Document everything. Continue excavation in controlled layers. Her voice remained steady, but something inside it had changed. Not hope, not certainty, something sharper. Direction. Back inside the building, Daniel Mercer was still speaking when Laura returned. I didn't mean for it to go past that point, he said again, as if repetition could stabilize meaning. I just reacted. Everything became immediate. No time to think. Laura placed a notepad on the table, but did not open it yet. Daniel, she said, we are recovering physical evidence from your family property. His head lifted slightly for the first time. Not surprise, not denial, something more complicated. Recognition of consequence. Laura continued, and I need you to be precise, not emotional, not interpretive, precise. Daniel swallowed. For a moment, he looked younger than he had in previous interviews. Not physically, mentally, as if precision itself was something he had been avoiding for 2 decades. I don't know what you found, he said. That's why I need you to tell me what you think is there, Laura replied. Silence again. Then Daniel spoke slowly. I think I went back, he said. Not immediately, later, and I think I tried to fix it. But I didn't know how. I didn't understand what I was doing. I just remember digging. That's what I remember most clearly. The ground. The word hung between them. Digging. Laura did not react outwardly. But internally, the timeline shifted again. Because now the land was not just a location. It was an action. A sequence. A decision repeated. Outside, the excavation team paused again. A second anomaly had been uncovered nearby. A layered disturbance in soil density that suggested multiple points of interference, not just one. This was no longer a single event. It was a pattern, and patterns imply repetition. Laura left the room again without ending the interview. The field was brighter now than it had been all day, floodlights cutting through the night in stark white beams that turned the landscape into something almost unreal. Every ridge of earth, every footprint, every mark of equipment was visible in harsh detail. A forensic supervisor met her at the edge. He did not speak immediately, just gestured. This time, the shape beneath the soil was clearer, defined enough that denial was no longer a useful response. Laura stood still for several seconds, not because she was unsure, but because the implication of what she was seeing demanded time to be absorbed correctly. Then she asked the only question that mattered in that moment. How long have we been on top of this? The supervisor hesitated. We don't know yet, he said. But not recently. Years. Possibly decades. Laura nodded once. Slow. Controlled. Inside the sheriff's office, Daniel Mercer had stopped speaking entirely. Not because he had nothing left to say, but because language itself had begun to fail at containing what the investigation was now approaching. Outside, Michigan remained silent in the way it always had been. But beneath that silence, something long buried was finally beginning to define its edges. And for the first time since 2001, the ground itself was no longer just holding secrets. It was releasing them. By dawn, the field no longer belonged to night. It belonged to exposure. Floodlights still burned, but they felt weaker now, as if the darkness had already learned everything it needed to know and was slowly withdrawing. The soil, once indistinct and uniform, now carried structure. Not just disturbance, but intention. Layers that did not belong together. Ground that had been persuaded into place rather than allowed to settle naturally. Every few meters, flags marked points of interest. Every few meters, something beneath the surface suggested the same uncomfortable conclusion. This was not random geography. This was controlled disruption. Laura Bennett had not slept. No one on the core team had. Sleep would have required distance from implication, and distance was no longer available. Inside the command trailer, maps of the property were covered in overlapping grids. Old survey data layered beneath new thermal scans. Handwritten notes intersecting with digital overlays. The land was being translated into information, but translation was imperfect. Something always resisted full conversion. A technician entered quietly and placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. No announcement. No explanation needed. Inside was another fragment. Not large. Not visually striking, but significant enough that it had been handled with full protocol. Laura did not open it immediately. Instead, she looked at the accumulation. One fragment had become several. Several had become a pattern. And patterns, once visible, are difficult to unsee. Outside, excavation resumed at a slower pace. Not because urgency had faded, but because precision had taken priority over speed. Every movement now carried the weight of potential revelation. Every shovel of soil felt like an irreversible act. Then, just after sunrise, a call came from Sector 3. The tone was different this time. Not excitement. Not uncertainty. Control strained at the edges. Laura moved quickly. The team had paused around a section of ground that had shifted in consistency. The soil there had resisted earlier attempts at classification. Now, with deeper excavation, it had begun to give way in a way that suggested enclosure beneath it rather than emptiness. A forensic specialist stood at the edge of the pit, motioning for silence. Not absolute silence. Functional silence. The kind required when the world is about to change shape. Laura stepped closer. At first, there was nothing visually definitive. Only layers. Darker soil beneath lighter soil. A compression that did not align with natural settling. Then, as tools moved carefully through the final layer, the texture changed. Not stone. Not root. Something else. Something structured. A pause spread through the team like a wave. No one spoke, because speaking would turn uncertainty into definition too early. The first visible confirmation came minutes later. A shape, not fully revealed, but unmistakably non-natural in outline. Laura did not allow interpretation. She ordered the area widened incrementally, controlled excavation only, no disturbance beyond necessary exposure. But even controlled exposure has emotional impact. Because the moment something buried begins to resemble something known, the human mind rushes to complete the image. And completion is dangerous. The pit expanded slowly under careful hands. And then it happened. A shift in soil revealed material that did not belong to the earth. A fabric-like surface, degraded by time, partially integrated with sediment. Its original color indistinguishable, its texture compromised by decades underground. The team froze again. This time, the silence was heavier. Not procedural. Personal. Laura knelt at the edge. Her voice was low. "Do not remove," she said. "Document. Photograph. Preserve context." A camera clicked. Once. Then again. The images would later become evidence. But in that moment, they were something else entirely. Witness. A second technician called softly from the opposite side of the excavation zone. "There's more." The words were simple, but they carried a shift in gravity. More meant structure. More meant continuation. More meant this was not an isolated deposit. The excavation widened again. And slowly, carefully, the ground began to yield what it had concealed for more than 2 decades. Inside the command trailer, Laura's phone buzzed. It was the sheriff. Daniel Mercer had requested another statement. Immediate. Laura did not hesitate. She returned to the building within minutes. The hallway felt different now. Not metaphorically, physically. As if the structure itself had absorbed the change in momentum outside and redistributed it into its interior spaces. Daniel was already seated when she entered. He looked less composed than before. Not panicked, but strained. as if something external had begun pressing inward. Laura sat across from him. She did not begin with questions this time. She placed a single printed image on the table. Not labeled, not explained, just an image taken minutes earlier from the excavation site. Daniel looked at it. For a long time, long enough that the silence between them stopped being neutral and started becoming meaningful. His breathing changed slightly, not rapid, not irregular, but altered. Recognition is rarely loud. It is usually quiet, contained, delayed. That's the property, he said. Laura watched him closely. We are recovering evidence consistent with a concealed burial site, she said. Multiple indicators, multiple layers, and we are not finished. Daniel did not respond immediately. His eyes remained on the image. Then he spoke. I didn't think it would still be there, he said. The sentence was not a confession. Not yet, but it was a fracture in denial. Laura leaned slightly forward. Tell me what you mean by that. Daniel exhaled. Long, measured, like he was choosing between versions of himself. I thought I had buried everything, he said. Not just physically, mentally. I thought time would erase it, that it would disappear into everything else that happens in life. He paused. But it didn't. Laura did not interrupt, because this was the moment where narratives either stabilized or collapsed. Daniel continued. I remember going back, he said again. I remember the ground being different than I thought it would be. Harder, like it resisted me. I remember thinking I was fixing something, but I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I wasn't thinking in steps. His voice lowered. I was trying to undo something that couldn't be undone. Outside, another update came through. The excavation team had uncovered a second layer of disturbance adjacent to the first. Parallel pattern. Not random. Not incidental. Laura closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them. The structure was becoming clearer now. Not in detail, but in logic. Daniel watched her reaction carefully. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke again. I don't know what you're going to find, he said. I don't remember every detail the way you need me to, but I remember enough to know I didn't leave her where she could just disappear on her own. The room tightened again. Laura did not respond immediately, because statements like that are not endpoints. They are transitions. Back at the site, the excavation reached a point where soil resistance changed again. And this time there was no ambiguity. The team uncovered a more continuous structure beneath the ground layer. Not exposed fully, but enough to confirm intentional concealment. A forensic archaeologist whispered something to another technician. No one recorded it. No one needed to. The implication was already understood. Laura arrived back at the field just as the sun broke fully through the horizon. Light spread across the excavation zone in a way that made everything more visible, and therefore more real. She stood at the edge of the pit for a long time, not speaking, not directing, just observing, because at a certain point in an investigation, leadership becomes less about instruction and more about witness. A technician approached her. We need authorization for full exposure, he said quietly. Laura nodded once. Proceed, she said. As the team resumed work, Daniel Mercer sat alone in the interview room miles away, staring at the same image that had started this shift. But now his expression was no longer just recognition. It was something closer to inevitability. Outside, Michigan continued moving through its morning routine. Cars passed. People went to work. Schools opened. Coffee shops filled. Normal life proceeded without interruption. But beneath a quiet field of earth, normality was being rewritten in layers. And for the first time in 23 years, the silence surrounding Emily Harper was no longer complete. It was breaking, slowly, irreversibly, and whatever came next would no longer belong to speculation. It would belong to recovery. The authorization did not feel like permission. It felt like inevitability being acknowledged on paper. Once signed, once spoken, once transmitted through official channels, the excavation at the Mercer property stopped being an investigation and became something closer to recovery protocol. The language changed across radios and clipboards. Site integrity, context preservation, controlled exposure, words chosen to contain emotion, even as emotion continued to rise beneath every layer of soil. The pit had grown deeper now than anyone had initially intended. Not because of urgency alone, because the ground kept confirming that there was more. And more, in this context, was never neutral. Laura Bennett stood at the edge of the excavation zone as daylight sharpened every edge of the scene. The land, once flat and unremarkable in memory, now looked divided into phases of interference. Each layer of soil told a different version of time. Each fragment removed revealed another decision made long ago and hidden beneath the next. A technician climbed out of the pit slowly, removing gloves with deliberate care. No one asked him immediately what he had seen. They already knew that whatever came out of the ground would not behave like a single revelation. It would arrive in stages, like memory, like confession, like collapse. Inside the command trailer, maps were being updated again. The property no longer looked like land. It looked like sequence. Movement across it was being reconstructed hour by hour. Estimated paths, possible stops, points of disturbance, the shape of an event trying to reassemble itself from absence. Laura's phone vibrated. A message from the excavation lead. They had reached a deeper structural boundary. And beneath it, another anomaly. Not random debris. Not environmental intrusion. Something placed with enough intention that even time had not fully erased its presence. Laura read the message twice. Then she exhaled slowly. Outside, the wind shifted again, moving across the open field with a steadiness that felt almost indifferent to what had been uncovered. Trees at the edge of the property swayed slightly, as if reacting late to events that had already occurred years earlier. She returned to the site. The team had expanded the excavation perimeter again, carefully, respecting the fragile structure beneath the soil. Every movement now carried a dual awareness, uncovering truth while preserving whatever truth still remained intact. Then the call came, a voice from inside the pit. No urgency, just clarity. We have layering consistent with concealment. Laura descended. Each step into the excavation felt like moving backward through time. The air grew denser, cooler, less affected by the sun above. The walls of the pit revealed stratified earth, each band a different year, a different version of reality. At the bottom, the structure was clearer, not fully exposed, but undeniable in shape. A controlled void beneath the soil had collapsed partially over time, creating a space where material had been preserved in unnatural condition. The team worked carefully, exposing edges rather than forcing removal. And then, finally, something shifted. A section gave way in a way that was not geological, but constructed. The team froze again. This time, there was no hesitation in interpretation. Laura stepped closer. Her voice was low. "Document everything," she said. "No disturbance beyond exposure." Cameras clicked. Measuring tools activated. Hands moved carefully through soil that now behaved like evidence rather than environment. And beneath it, a second layer of material appeared. Not organic, not natural. Something that suggested containment rather than placement. The discovery changed the atmosphere instantly, because containment implies intent. And intent implies understanding. And understanding, in a case like this, changes everything. Laura did not allow speculation aloud. But internally, the structure of the case was shifting again. The confession from Daniel Mercer had described panic, confusion, disorientation, a lack of clarity in sequence. But the land was telling a different story. Not of chaos, but of repetition, controlled return, multiple disturbances, multiple interactions with the same location over time, which meant the event was not singular. It had phases. Back inside the sheriff's office, Daniel was no longer speaking. He sat in silence that had changed texture from earlier interviews. It was no longer defensive silence. It was not avoidance. It was something closer to depletion. Laura entered without announcement. She placed another image on the table. This one different, a wider shot of the excavation, the layered structure partially exposed. Daniel looked at it, and this time his reaction was immediate. Not denial, not confusion, but stillness. The kind that happens when memory collides with something it can no longer reshape. I didn't remember it like that, he said quietly. Laura observed him closely. Like what? He hesitated. Like there being more than one time, he said. That sentence altered the trajectory of everything. Laura did not respond immediately, because now the investigation was no longer centered on a single event. It was centered on recurrence. Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to warm something that was not physical. I thought it was once, he said. Just once. I keep saying that because that's how I remember it. But when you show me this, it doesn't match that. Laura leaned slightly forward. Tell me what you think it matches. Daniel's voice lowered. I think I went back. Silence. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just confirmation forming slowly under pressure. I think I went back more than I admitted, he continued. I don't know how many times. I don't know what I was doing exactly, but I remember the feeling, like I couldn't leave it alone, like I had to keep checking. The word checking landed differently than expected. It did not imply resolution. It implied persistence. Laura's tone remained steady. And during those returns, you interacted with the site again. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I think so, he said. Outside, the excavation team reached another boundary layer. This one more stable, more defined. A technician called for Laura. When she returned to the field, the sun was higher now, illuminating the entire site in harsh clarity. The land no longer looked like a place where something had happened. It looked like a place where something had been managed. The difference was subtle, but critical. A senior forensic specialist pointed to a newly exposed section. There's a separation here, he said. Different compaction patterns. This wasn't a single disturbance event. Laura knelt at the edge. She traced the line visually. He was right. The soil told a story of interruption, stabilization, then return. Not once, but at least twice, possibly more. She stood slowly. The implication settled in without resistance. This was not a single moment buried by time. It was a sequence of actions layered over time. And sequences require presence. Multiple presences. Back in the interview room, Daniel finally spoke again without being prompted. I didn't understand what I was doing, he said. Not in the way people think. It wasn't planned. It wasn't organized. It was like I kept going back because I couldn't accept what had already happened. And every time I went back, it got worse. Laura watched him carefully. Worse how? He hesitated. I made it more real each time, he said. That was the closest thing to clarity he had produced. And it changed everything again. Because it suggested not just a single act of panic, but repeated engagement with consequence. Outside, excavation paused briefly as equipment recalibrated for deeper exposure. The team had now reached a level where the structure beneath the soil could no longer be described as incidental. It was layered, intentional, revisited, and somewhere within those layers, the past 23 years of silence were beginning to lose their stability. Laura stood alone for a moment at the edge of the pit, watching the land that had held its secret for longer than some of the investigators had been alive when it began. Then she made the next decision. Not aloud, not formally, but internally. This case was no longer about discovery. It was about reconstruction. And reconstruction meant everything had to be reinterpreted, including the man who had just begun remembering that his own memory might not be complete. Above the excavation, Michigan's morning continued as if nothing had changed. But beneath it, the ground had already begun to tell a story that no longer matched silence. It was telling a story of return. And return always complicates truth. The word return began to echo differently after that morning. It stopped being an abstract idea. It stopped being a possibility. It started behaving like evidence. Not visible evidence at first. Not something you could hold in your hand or place in an evidence bag. But something more dangerous in investigative work. A shift in pattern recognition. Once the idea of return entered the case file, every previous assumption began to weaken under its weight. Laura Bennett felt it most sharply in the hours that followed. The excavation site was no longer just a location of discovery. It had become a map of behavior. And behavior, unlike soil, does not stay buried cleanly. It leaves structure in memory, in witness accounts, in contradictions that suddenly stop looking like noise and start looking like sequence. Back at the sheriff's office, Daniel Mercer was no longer speaking continuously. He had entered a new phase. Fragmentation, short answers, pauses that stretched too long, moments where he seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. Laura had seen this before in long interrogations, but not often at this scale. Not in cases that stretched across decades. Time did something unusual to memory under pressure. It did not erase it evenly. It broke it into inconsistent pieces, some sharp, some softened, some completely detached from their original context. And the more pressure applied, the more those pieces drifted. Laura placed a new set of documents on the table. Timeline reconstruction, not official yet, still being built from field updates and forensic reports. Daniel did not touch them. He looked at them without moving, as if they were not paper, as if they were something heavier. Outside, the excavation resumed at a deeper layer than before. The team had now transitioned from cautious exposure to controlled structural mapping. The goal was no longer simply to uncover what lay beneath. It was to understand how it had been arranged. An arrangement always implies decision. A technician radioed in from the north section of the pit. "We've identified a secondary disturbance corridor." Laura closed her eyes briefly when she heard it. Corridor. A word that did not belong in natural geography. She walked back out immediately. The wind had shifted again. Stronger now, carrying dust from the disturbed ground across the perimeter in thin waves. The site looked less like an excavation and more like an archaeological reconstruction of something that had been deliberately hidden from future interpretation. The technician pointed. "There," he said. A narrow band of soil variation ran diagonally beneath the primary excavation zone. Subtle but consistent. A line of disruption that did not match random digging patterns. It suggested movement along a path rather than a single fixed point. Laura knelt again. She traced it visually. It was real, not imagined, not speculative. A line of interaction. Multiple engagements with the same space over time. She stood slowly. "This wasn't one event," she said quietly. The technician nodded. "No," he replied. "It looks like repeated access." The words hung in the air. Repeated access. Not accident. Not singular panic. Access implies intention, even when the intention is confused. Back inside, Daniel had begun tapping his fingers lightly against the table. Not rhythmic. Not intentional. Just repetitive. Laura noticed immediately when she returned. He stopped when she sat down. But the gesture had already said something. "You said you went back," she began. Daniel nodded slightly. "Yes. More than once." A pause. "Yes." Laura let silence settle for a moment. Then she leaned forward. "Why?" Daniel stared at the table. "I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense," he said. "It wasn't like a decision each time. It was like I kept thinking I had missed something, that I needed to understand it better. That if I understood it better, it would stop feeling like this." Laura watched him closely. "Like what?" He hesitated. "Like it wasn't finished," he said. That sentence changed the shape of the interrogation room. Because unfinished implies continuation. And continuation implies structure. Laura spoke carefully. "So each time you returned, you believed you were correcting your understanding." Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "Not correcting. Trying to contain it. Like if I saw it enough times, it would become smaller in my head. Laura did not respond immediately, because this was no longer a simple confession narrative. It was a psychological loop being described without technical language. Outside, another update came through. The second corridor had extended further than initially mapped. And beneath it, a third layer of disturbance had been identified. The site was becoming increasingly complex. Not chaotic. Structured complexity. Laura returned to the field again. The sun had moved higher, casting the entire excavation in harsh, revealing light. There was no longer any softness in the scene. Every edge of exposed soil, every tool mark, every fragment of earth removal was visible in full clarity. A senior forensic analyst met her at the edge. "We've mapped at least 3 distinct phases of ground disturbance," he said. "Phases," Laura repeated. "Yes," he said. "Not random digging. Not single event burial. This is structured repetition over time." Laura exhaled slowly. 3 phases. Not 1. Not even 2. 3 distinct moments of interaction with the same concealed location. She looked back toward the pit. The land was no longer telling a story of disappearance. It was telling a story of return, revision, and reinforcement. Back in the interview room, Daniel suddenly spoke without being prompted. "I didn't think I was doing anything wrong at first," he said quietly. Laura turned her attention immediately. "I just thought I was trying to fix what I didn't understand." His voice tightened slightly, but it never became clearer. It just changed. Laura leaned forward. "Changed how?" Daniel hesitated. "Each time I went back," he said, "it felt different, like I was arriving later into something I had already started without knowing it." The phrasing mattered. Laura caught it instantly. "You're describing yourself as if you weren't fully aware during each return," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I wasn't," he said. Silence followed. Not empty, heavy. Outside, excavation reached another critical layer. The team had now uncovered a long, continuous structural irregularity running beneath the main site. It suggested deliberate modification of terrain over extended time periods. Not quick burial. Not concealment in panic. But repeated shaping of the ground itself. Laura returned again. The field now looked less like a crime scene and more like a record of behavior encoded into earth. A behavior that refused to present itself as a single moment. A technician approached her. "There's something else," he said. His voice was lower now. Controlled. Careful. "We're finding variations in tool impact patterns. Different pressure points. Different depths. Different intervals." Laura understood immediately. Different tools. Different times. Different returns. The implications settled heavily. This was no longer a question of one person acting once in panic. It was a timeline of repeated engagement. She stood still for a moment, then said, "Map every phase separately." The technician nodded. Back inside, Daniel Mercer was now sitting very still. Too still. The kind of stillness that comes after verbal exhaustion. Laura placed the latest field report on the table. She did not need to explain it. Daniel looked at it anyway, and for the first time since the interrogation began, his expression changed in a way that was not defensive or uncertain. It was recognition of scale. "I didn't think it would look like that," he said quietly. Laura observed him carefully. "Like what?" He swallowed. "Like I kept going back," he said. The sentence was simple, but now it carried weight, because repetition was no longer just described. It was documented. Laura spoke carefully. "Daniel, we are now seeing evidence of multiple structured disturbances at the site over time. Not one event. Not one burial. Multiple interactions." Daniel closed his eyes. Longer this time. When he opened them, something had shifted again. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say to that," he said. Laura did not respond immediately, because this was the point where suspects either broke into denial again or moved deeper into acknowledgement. Daniel continued. "I remember thinking each time I went back that I was fixing something," he said. But if you're saying it happened more than I remember, then I don't know what I was actually doing. Laura kept her voice steady. That's what we're trying to understand. Outside, the excavation lights began preparing for extended operation into the next cycle. Because the ground was not finished revealing itself. And neither was the case. Somewhere between memory and soil, between confession and structure, the truth was still forming. And it was no longer behaving like a single moment in time. It was behaving like something that had been revisited too many times to remain simple. The cold case was no longer cold. And now it was no longer singular either. It was layered. And layers, once exposed, never returned to silence in the same way again. By the 9th phase of excavation, the word site no longer felt accurate. It had become something closer to a record. A physical record, written in soil, overwritten, revised, and rewritten again by hands that had returned to it across time. The land no longer behaved like an environment. It behaved like documentation that had been partially destroyed but never fully erased. Laura Bennett stood at the edge of the expanded excavation perimeter as the afternoon light shifted into something colder, sharper. The sun no longer softened anything. It exposed. Every exposed layer of earth reflected back a different version of the same truth. 3 phases had already been confirmed. Now there were indications of more. Not just disturbances, re-entry points, controlled access patterns. Movement that suggested the same person or the same intention had returned repeatedly to the same location under different psychological conditions. Inside the command trailer, reports were being updated in real time. Each new layer of soil removed did not simply add evidence. It restructured the timeline. And timelines, once restructured, demand reinterpretation of everything that came before. Laura reviewed the latest field analysis. The pattern had evolved again. What initially appeared as 3 phases of disturbance had now expanded into at least 4, possibly 5, depending on how the soil compression variations were classified. The forensic team was cautious. They avoided definitive numbering, because numbering implies certainty, and certainty was still fragile. A radio crackled. Sector 4 has identified another anomaly. Laura did not respond immediately. She already knew what that meant. She walked back out. The wind had shifted again, colder now, carrying fine dust from the exposed excavation zones across the perimeter like a thin veil that refused to settle. The entire property felt less like ground and more like something being slowly unwrapped. At Sector 4, the team had paused again. Not in alarm, in recognition. The soil here behaved differently from surrounding sections. More compact, more resistant, as if it had been intentionally reinforced. Laura approached slowly. A technician pointed to a narrow vertical inconsistency running through the soil layers. "It's not natural compression," he said. "It's deliberate. Something was used to stabilize this section." Laura knelt. She traced the line visually. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Reinforcement beneath concealment. Not just burial. Preservation. The implication was immediate and uncomfortable, because preservation implies awareness of future discovery. Laura stood slowly. "This section was intentionally maintained," she said. The technician nodded. "Yes, it wasn't just covered. It was structured." That word again. Structured. Not chaos. Not panic. Structure. Back inside the sheriff's office, Daniel Mercer was no longer speaking in complete sentences. His responses had shortened further. Fragments now dominated. Laura sat across from him, observing carefully. There was a shift in his posture that had not been present earlier. A slight inward collapse, as if the act of maintaining coherence was becoming increasingly difficult. She placed another updated report on the table. This one more detailed than the last. Multiple phase overlays, color-coded disturbances, temporal mapping estimates. Daniel looked at it without touching it. For a long time. Then he spoke. "I don't remember it like that," he said quietly. Laura did not react immediately, because that sentence had become more complex each time it was repeated. "Like what?" she asked. Daniel's voice lowered. Like it happened in pieces, he said. Laura watched him closely. Tell me what you do remember. A pause. Longer than before. I remember the first time, he said finally. I remember thinking I needed to go back and see what I had done. But after that it gets mixed. Laura leaned forward slightly. Mixed how? Daniel shook his head. I don't know which memory belongs to which time, he said. It all feels like one long thing now, like it didn't happen in separate moments, like it just continued. Outside, excavation teams reached another threshold layer. A new structural variation had been identified beneath the previously mapped phases. This one deeper, older in appearance, and significantly more complex in pattern. Laura returned immediately. The site was now divided into multiple excavation zones, each corresponding to different disturbance signatures. The ground resembled a stratified archive of repeated interaction. A forensic archaeologist met her at the boundary. We've confirmed at least 4 distinct disturbance phases, he said, possibly 5, and there's evidence suggesting even earlier interaction than the first we identified. Laura processed this slowly. Earlier, she repeated. Yes, he said. We think the earliest disturbance predates the main event reconstruction by several days, possibly even before initial disappearance timeframe stabilization. That sentence altered everything again, because it meant the sequence was no longer linear. It was recursive. Laura looked out across the excavation field. The land was no longer telling a story of what happened once. It was telling a story of what kept being revisited. Inside the interview room, Daniel suddenly spoke without prompting. I think I kept checking it, he said. Laura turned back to him. Checking what? Daniel hesitated. The ground, he said. I kept thinking I needed to make sure it was stable. Like if I didn't check it, something would come back up. The phrasing triggered immediate attention. Laura's voice remained controlled. You're describing repeated return behavior driven by uncertainty. Daniel nodded slowly. I guess, he said. Laura leaned forward. How many times did you return, Daniel? Silence. Long. Heavy. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. That answer had appeared before, but now it carried different weight. Not evasion. Not refusal. Limitation. A boundary of memory itself. Outside, another update came in. A 5th disturbance signature had been confirmed. Distinct from all previous layers. Deeper. Older. More fragmented. Laura returned to the field once more. By now, the excavation resembled a multi-layered diagram of human interference over time. Each zone represented a different moment of return. Each layer a different psychological state. Each disturbance a different version of intent collapsing into action. The forensic lead met her at the center zone. We're seeing something unusual, he said. Laura waited. There are inconsistencies in tool imprint angles, he continued. They don't align with a single operator profile. Either the individual changed significantly over time, or there were multiple episodes under different conditions. Laura's gaze sharpened slightly. Different conditions, she repeated. Yes, he said. Fatigue states. Variations in force. Even hesitation markers in some layers. The implication